Dr. Sleep is in a bit of a tricky situation. It's technically a sequel to Stanley Kubrick's original 1980 film adaptation of The Shining, and yet it's trying to do service to Stephen King's original novel of the same name. Is it able to hit that sweet spot and deliver another great Stephen King adaptation? My thoughts on Dr. Sleep coming up.
Did you rub my lamp?
1,000 generations to the Una.
Here we go.
Hey, how's it going, everyone? And welcome to FilmSpeak, where film is our second language. I'm Griffin, as always, and if film is your second language, consider hitting that subscribe button for more insightful and articulate film discourse and analysis. Dr. Sleep is directed by Mike Flanagan, and it stars Ewan McGregor, Rebecca Ferguson, and Kylie Curran. Struggling with alcoholism, Dan Torrance remains traumatized by the sinister events that occurred at the Overlook Hotel when he was a child. His hope for a peaceful existence soon becomes shattered when he meets Abra, a teen who shares his extrasensory gift of the shine. Together, they form an unlikely alliance to battle the True Knot, a cult whose members try to feed off the shine of innocence to become immortal. So as I mentioned at the beginning, this film is really fighting two battles here. It's trying to be the proper sequel to Kubrick's 1980 film, but it's also adapting Stephen King's novel of the same name. And so I think for a lot of people, and even myself included, walking out of The Shining, it really is the story of two visions, and while sometimes those visions do align and they lead to some of the best moments in the film, I can understand why people would say, hey, I really liked when this film was being a proper sequel to Stanley Kubrick's movie, and then other people when they say, I liked it when it ditched the Kubrick stuff and really focused on being a proper adaptation of King's original novel. When it comes down to it, what I really appreciated about it was that it had the aesthetic and chilling suspense that Kubrick invoked in his original film. It's perfectly carried over here by Mike Flanagan as he crafts some very suspenseful moments, very long, drawn-out takes, and creates a constant sense of uneasiness and dread. Flanagan is just simply a master when it comes to moving the camera. He moves the camera so elegantly and so subtly to the point where you don't even notice that he has complete control over you until he wants you to notice it. And that's probably one of my favorite things about Dr. Sleep is that Flanagan channels Kubrick's atmospheric approach to tackling King's original material, but it never feels like a cheap imitation. Flanagan really has a way of making it his own. He's got a lot of dynamic camera movements, a lot of long one takes, similar to what Kubrick did in The Shining, but approached in a different way. If you're a fan of the look, feel, and overall sense you get while watching something like Haunting of Hill House, then you're gonna love what Flanagan does in here because he's able to take that approach, bring it to a feature format, and suck the viewers in for the ride. Now, the effectiveness of Dr. Sleep is certainly due to how long Flanagan allows certain sequences to play out in this constant building of tension and suspense. However, something else that shouldn't be overlooked is the score by the Newton brothers, as they perfectly channel the music from Kubrick's original film, once again, without imitation. There's nods and homages here and there for sure, but for the most part, the music really helps shape this atmospheric bubble that just encapsulates you as you're watching the film. And that would be impressive enough, but Flanagan employs one more technique here, and it is the use of silence, or in some cases, the lack of silence. Throughout the entirety of the 2-hour and 33-minute runtime, there is a constant pulse going on in the form of what sounds like a heartbeat. Now, this obviously helps in building suspense, but it also creates a constant sense of uneasiness, really pushing you to the edge of your seat for every single minute. And I know that sounds like a stressful time, but it's employed in such a tasteful manner to the point where you don't even realize it's happening sometime, but you know that something is off. Now, on the flip side of that, when we get to some of the more important, impactful character moments, Flanagan will dip out all sound, and it really just emphasizes the chilling nature of what's going on. And it's moments like that where you truly realize the effectiveness of this constant pounding. I know this sounds like such a minuscule thing, but it was part of the craft that absolutely blew me away. And so I have to applaud the hell out of Flanagan for boldly using this for such a long-running film. And on top of that, it does create a somewhat overwhelming nature, really placing us into the mindset of Dan Torrance, which, let's talk about Dan Torrance and the rest of the characters. Ewan McGregor is fantastic in this film. He's always great. We love Ewan, we love Obi-Wan, and every time he pops up in something, it's just a joy. But in this film, he's a little more reserved. It's a lot of internal acting, and you can really see the pain that Dan has gone through throughout his life. We see immediately the trauma that has been inflicted upon Dan and how he has to compartmentalize these ghosts that are trying to haunt him. Similar to his father, he begins to pick up alcoholic tendencies, and so we see a cycle start to repeat itself, and Dan is ultimately faced with the challenge of breaking that cycle, of becoming the exact opposite person that his father was. And through that, we get a very interesting commentary on hereditary addictions, on trauma, in overcoming these hardships to let yourself shine. And I think Dr. Sleep is at its best when it focuses on those elements. Unfortunately, I don't think the filmmakers devote enough time to that side of the story. However, when they do, and when some of the events happen in the third act of the film, it is effective, but it just had me wanting even more of it. Now, as much as I love Ewan McGregor, it was ultimately Rebecca Ferguson who knocked my socks off. She is incredible. She has such presence and charisma on screen. She's very devilish, and she chews scenery like no one else in this movie. In fact, every time that Rebecca Ferguson wasn't doing something on screen, I was missing her a little bit. You can sense the desperation in her being the antithesis to what Dan wants to be. She wants to use these shining abilities for her own personal game, like a drug, like an addiction. She's convincing and seductive, yet wickedly evil, and the way Ferguson is able to incorporate all of these elements into this character and elevate what is already written on the page is incredible. I really enjoyed the themes of Dr. Sleep, and I can see why fans of the book absolutely love this material. I think there's a lot to say about trauma and how it affects your innocence ultimately when you come into adulthood, and then also being able to preserve that pure creativity and originality without having people suck it from you is very important, and it's something that King has really touched on in a lot of his work. But ultimately, I do think they're trying to juggle too much, and thus this is where the problem of the movie being two different interpretations really kind of shows itself. I loved the world building and the lore and the mythology, and really delving deep into the shine abilities and how certain people can have them, how people use them for selfish reasons and others use them to better society. That was really interesting, and I enjoyed when we got to learn a little bit about that more, but it also didn't always gel with Dan's journey that was going on. And even though the filmmaking techniques are in line and definitely feel Kubrickian, there is a distinct line that is drawn between when Flanagan is being a sequel to Kubrick's original Shining and then also adapting King's novel. And I'm not entirely sure how else they could have done it other than picking a lane, but I think ultimately when it comes down to it, it did work for me. You just have to be willing to forgive certain things here or there. Before giving my final verdict on Dr. Sleep, guys, why don't you take a second here and like this video, share with your friends, and subscribe to this channel for more insightful and articulate film discourse and analysis. I don't think I'm that crazy when I say Dr. Sleep might be my favorite Stephen King adaptation of the year. It does a great job of being a sequel to The Shining, and when it does incorporate the elements of the book, those are great too. Unfortunately, the two halves don't always gel together, and so it becomes a tale of two stories. I love the performances. Ewan McGregor is excellent, and I loved the character exploration of Dan. I just would have liked a little bit more, but Rebecca Ferguson Griffin is scene stealing. She chews every single moment, and believe it or not, I could have had more of her in this film. It's a very atmospheric, somber, contemplative journey, and Flanagan knows how to move a camera effectively. I'll say that much. Many will find the runtime long-winded and thus the film boring, but to me, I wouldn't have had it any other way, and especially when we get to the third act, there is so much payoff that just feels earned, and it's incredible, and oh my god, they did everything right when it comes to that third act. I loved it so much, and if you're a fan of this lore, of this world, of The Shining, you're definitely going to love it. And so for all of those reasons and the reasons I mentioned throughout my review, I'm ultimately going to be giving Dr. Sleep a 7.8 out of 10. And now I want to hear from you all. I want to know what the next Stephen King novel you want to see adapted is down in the comment section below. So many to choose from and so many great ones as well. And if you've seen Dr. Sleep, be sure to let me know your thoughts and opinions on that down there as well. As always, guys, you can like FilmSpeak on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, just search FilmSpeak. And if you like me specifically and you like what I have to say, you can give me a follow on Twitter at Griff Schiller. All right, that's going to do it for this review, guys, and I will catch you next time. Take care.